Hey, weedless classes, this is David Server. I am here to teach you a little bit about scaling trig functions. Basically, you guys need to know how to graph trig functions. And so you got sine, and you got cosine, and you got tangent, etc. But today, all we really need to make sure you understand is sine and cosine. So you can see that sine is a wave. If you graph it, I'm just going to give you the big picture of what it kind of looks like. It looks kind of like this. Keeps oscillating over and over and over. It just keeps going if you want to keep going. And the main points that you need to understand on the graph are here at 0, here is pi, here is 2 pi. And there's usually 4 main spots that you are going to be checked on. And you're going to need to have these 4 labeled. And of course, between 0 and pi, you got pi over 2. And between pi and 2 pi, you have 3 pi over 2. Think of it this way. 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, which would reduce to pi, right? 3 pi over 2, and this would be like 4 pi over 2. And that's the same as 2 pi. Now, if you want to get a picture of, on the unit circle, when we were talking about sine, it's important to understand how that was working. All right, so sine, when you were at 0, sine is the y, right? So let's get the 4 main points here. We have 1 comma 0, and we have 0 comma 1, and we have -1 comma 0, and then we have 0 comma -1. Those are the 4 main points. And if you were going to look at sine at those different spots, sine is the y. The way I understand it, you guys have learned this about the unit circle. Sine is the y. So sine at 0 degrees, if you have an angle, it's not even open at all. Like if you were going to put say this angle, that's like a 30-degree angle, right? If the angle is not open at all, if it's at 0, then that's sine of 0 degrees. And sine of 0 is 0. Well, if we look back at this graph, do you see that sine of 0 is 0? It's right there. And then there's sine of pi over 2 would be the next thing. That's like right here, right? And I already showed you on the graph that it goes up. So if we go back here, we say sine of 90 degrees, or pi over 2, sine is the y, and the y is 1. And you can see that it goes from 0 to 1. And then if you just keep going, the next, go back here, it's gone up to 1. And then you go to pi. At pi, it's going to be 0. I can see that. Now, if I go around here, and I wrap this around to pi, and then what's the y of it? 0. So, I hope you can see that this is just cycling. It goes from 0 up to 1, down to 0 again, and now where is it going to go? To -1. Okay, sorry, got interrupted there with a phone call. It's related to the sub for today. So anyway, we were watching sine cycling back and forth, and it went up to 1, down to 0, down to -1, back up to 0 again. And it keeps going like that, of course. If you went to the next notch here, it would be, and again, if you know these are 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, 4 pi over 2, that's 5 pi over 2. It's the next one. It would end up being 1 again. What is that like? That's like going back to our picture here, and we've gone all the way from, start at 1, or start at 0, and then it ends up being 1, and then it's 0, and then it's down to -1. And then it's back to the same place it was in the first place, 0. And then at 5 pi over 2, it's all the way back up here again, and it's 1 again. And then it goes to 0 again, and then it goes to -1. And the point is you can just keep going around and around and around and around. Okay? So that's how sine works. Now, one of the things that your teachers like is for you to have an XY chart for that. And so let me just talk about the XY for just a minute. If you're talking about the XY chart for this graph for sine, you have x is 0, that's like the spot right here, y would be 0. So when x is pi over 2, then y is 1. And when x is pi, then y is 0. See how to write that? The next one's 3 pi over 2, and then it would be -1. And it just keeps going if you want to. Go to 2 pi, It's back to 0 again. And all right, let's talk about cosine for a minute. I have to make this video quick because I have to get going and helping other kids here. Um, we're going to be next talking about cosine. So cosine starts at 1 and it goes down to 0 and it comes bottoms out at -1, comes back up and tops out back at 1 again. Now that wasn't perfect. Pi there. About there. So the cosine is a lot the same. If you really continue it, it's just exactly the same as sine. In fact, if you were to put this graph up here, no, this is the one where we just made the sine. If I were to graph on the green line here and try to just copy the other one, cosine is the exact same thing. It's just shifted back like this. So it starts at this spot right here at 1 instead of starting at 0 like it did sine. All right, so cosine and sine are obviously the exact same wave. It's just that it's shifted over. In fact, specifically, it's shifted to the left pi over 2. So if I, there we go. If I move this over just 1 notch, which is pi over 2, it ends up being cosine. All right, so if I were to give you the main spots for cosine, the main spots for cosine are at 0, it is 1. So if I'm making an XY chart, at 0, it's 1. At this spot, which is pi over 2, at pi over 2, it's 0, as you can see from the graph. At this spot right here, which is pi, then it would be -1. At this spot, which is 3 pi over 2, hardest one to remember, then it's 0. And the last one at 2 pi, it's right there at 1. All right, so today on the worksheet, Mrs. Wiedela doesn't want you to try to do all the stretching and that kind of stuff. All she wants you to do is graph these, the sine and the cosine. And then later she'll show you how to stretch that graph. A couple other concepts that you might want to understand is amplitude and period. Again, she's going to teach you all about those tomorrow. And my job here is just to get you through what are the basic graphs of sine and cosine. So if you were going to look on the circle for this, if you're talking about cosine, now cosine is the x, and so it starts at 1. See? It starts at 1. And then it goes to 0, and then it goes to -1, and then it goes back to 0, and then it goes back to 1. So bottom line is it's just the x coordinates, and it's cycling between the lowest it ever goes is -1, and the highest it ever goes is 1, and it touches 0 in between. So I hope that's enough to get you going, to be able to graph sine and cosine.